Okay, this week I'd like to start talking about the small scale formal divisions of music that we can listen for quite easily, and as we go, we'll grow outward from there. As I said, we can think of form as a nested structure. So there's a like an organization of small phrases and subphrases and motives. Those all belong to larger orientations of music, like larger structures. Those structures are then organized into even larger structures, and then they are placed into movements and so on and so forth. So we start at the ground level, and so at the ground level we look for phrases and periods and sentence structure, and those are all divided by cadences. So first, let's start looking at what we see here in phrases. Phrases are our smallest musical idea, and we always end a phrase with a cadence. So a phrase is basically a musical idea that is punctuated with a cadence. I typically like to explain this as cadences as being different types of punctuation. And we listen for that kind of inflection at the end of a musical phrase. We label phrases with lowercase letters to show the comparisons of like or disliked phrases. So obviously, if we use the same letter, like letter A, we identify identical phrases. A prime would mean it's a similar phrase, but it ends differently, and that often happens because phrases will be changed slightly to accommodate different chords at the end of those phrases. So for instance, if a phrase ends with a half cadence, it will have, maybe T in the melody. If a phrase ends with a full cadence or an authentic cadence, it'll have maybe do or mi in the melody. So it'll be adjusted and changed to accommodate new cadences. And if the beginning of the phrase is melodically different than the original phrase, then we give it a different letter, like B. So let's look at this example. And in this case, we're looking at the phrase itself. So this is a good example because we can easily see different parts of the phrase. So you might recognize this tune. Pardon my piano playing. So we have two phrases, and I'll just play the right hand because it sounds so much better when I don't try to do two things at once. Okay, so that first phrase ends with a G in C major, and so that implies, especially with the G in the bass, that implies a half cadence at the end of this first phrase, wouldn't you say? We can hear that move to the dominant. And then it goes back to the tonic. And then ends with a G again here at the end of the second phrase. But we can hear how they are slightly different in the second half. So these two are phrases. They are complete musical ideas that end with a cadence. Within phrases, we can hear subphrases, which are smaller gestures that do not end with a cadence. They are not conclusive. They're not punctuated. Subphrases often accumulate to make a phrase, and this is important when we start talking about sentences later in this video. But we do not often label subphrases because they contribute to larger phrases. And so in this case, I've circled them, and we could think about that musical thought is a repetition of an idea, a motive, which we'll talk about in a second, but it doesn't have a cadence. There's no cadence at the end of this moment. There's no cadence at the end of this one either. There is one here because it concludes the larger phrase. A motive is a small, very important musical idea, and is often repeated in numerous ways. We can think of a motive as being maybe the identity of the phrase, the musical idea that we cling to when we listen, and they can be transposed, inverted, augmented, or diminished. They are able to be transposed or moved to another pitch level. Right? We can transpose it. We can invert it, meaning we reverse the order of intervallic content. Basically, if it goes up, if the original idea went up, instead it goes down. We can augment it, meaning we can change the amount of rhythmic values. Make it longer in time, and we can make it diminished, or basically make it faster. There's just ways in which we can manipulate a motive. So in this example, we can see the motives here and how the motives come back and are repeated. This is a new motive that is repeated. Even though it's just a little scale fragment, that motive gives this piece of music its identity. Same with this little thirds motive here at the end. A very common idiom are these thirds of classical music, and so that's a very common little thing. Same with the scale. And so we can manipulate motives in all kinds of ways, to extend them, to make them shorter, or we can use fragments of them in cool ways. But the idea, the big idea is that we build a musical idea out of these smaller concepts, motives, phrases, subphrases. So when we talk about periodic structure, we're thinking about all of those little elements as they piece together. In a periodic structure, two phrases are harmonically and melodically linked into a musical thought. It's essentially a progression of cadential motion that is enhanced by melody, right? A weaker cadence is often followed by a stronger one. It's like building a sentence or building a thought when you're writing. You don't end sentences with commas. You end them with periods. A comma might be a half cadence, and an authentic cadence might be like a exclamation point, if you will, a way to end a thought. And they often create an antecedent and consequent pair, meaning that one must be satisfied by the other. If you have an antecedent that ends with a half cadence, you need to satisfy that half cadence with an authentic cadence of some sort as a consequent. Symmetrical periods have phrases of the same length. Those are most common type of periodic structure. So let's look at something like this folk song. You might be familiar with O Susanna, right? So in measure 4, that first phrase ends on the word knee. It ends with a half cadence on the dominant, right, in D major. And then at the very end, it is satisfied by an authentic cadence. So these two phrases have all of those things going for it. They have a similar beginning, so they're parallel. That has a similar beginning. Very triadic, very simple folk song. first phrase ends in measure 4 with re, or the second scale degree in the melody. And so that implies a dominant chord. And then the same material is represented in parallel, only to have it end with do in the soprano in the melody and a tonic chord at the end. So these two phrases are periodic. These create a periodic structure, an antecedent at the beginning and a consequent at the end. The first phrase ends with a half cadence. The second phrase ends with a full cadence. They begin the same, so they are parallel, meaning that the two phrases begin the same way. So because the two phrases begin the same, we can call O Susanna a parallel period. If they were different, they would be a contrasting period. Modulating periods, or some call them progressive periods, are ones in which they have a half cadence followed by a full cadence or an authentic cadence, but the music moves to a new key. And that's very common too, because often music modulates to closely related keys. Our earlier example the first half ends with a half cadence in C major. The second half, we start to see this tonicization of the dominant. Right? So in measures 6, 7, and 8, we have F sharps in the texture. We have this sol, sol, do vocabulary in the bass. And so that is a authentic cadence in G, meaning that it moved to G major. So this first phrase, half cadence in C major. Second phrase, full cadence, but in G major. Okay, so that means that this has progressed and moved to a new key. It still is a periodic structure because the phrases progress with their cadences from half to full, or half cadence to authentic cadence. It's still a periodic structure because musically the two phrases are linked by motive, and we could even say that these are parallel modulating period, right? They're parallel because the first halves begin the same. So this slide is less important, but it basically states that we can have different variations of the parallel period and expansions of the period, but they still must employ a progression of cadences to be considered periodic. The word period or periodic implies this sense of departure and return, that there's a cycle to the music, that if we go to the half cadence, we must come back down to the full cadence. It must be resolved in some sort of cyclic way. Let's see. We go to this example here of a three-phrase example. Let's see if I can get this done. Half cadence. Half cadence. Full cadence. Okay, so harmonically we're in B flat major. We've gone from 1 to 5 here. Another phrase. This is contrasting, right? And it goes to a half cadence here, and then yet another phrase here, which concludes in B flat major on the tonic. So this whole passage is one musical thought, right? It's one continuous musical thought. We can hear it conclude at the end in measure 20. Double period is a 4-phrase group that has a progression of cadences where the last one is the most final one. And so let's look at phrases 1 and 3 to determine parallel or contrasting. So let's look at this one. So in this case, we have 4 phrases, and they're diagrammed down here. We have a first phrase, a second phrase. They are contrasting. We have a half cadence at the end of the second one. And then this whole structure repeats with a bit of embellishment. So we have A prime after that with the authentic cadence here. And so this is all considered to be one unified musical thought because of this perfect authentic cadence satisfying this one here, right? So these 2 cadences are, yes, they're authentic, but the overarching structure of being 4 different phrases is satisfied here at the end with this perfect authentic cadence. So this would be a parallel double period because these 2 phrases begin the same. Let's quickly look at the musical sentence and spend a few minutes on that. We can think of a musical sentence as a phrase group that is ended with a cadence. But initially, in the smaller phrases within a musical sentence, they are not typically ending with a cadence of any kind. So a musical sentence is a rhetorical device, very common in the classical era. It's like a statement that has 2 short statements of a motive or subphrase answered by an extended statement and a conclusion. Let's go back up to my Clementi example up here. If I can find it. I think it's here. This first phrase is a musical sentence. 2 small phrases. Okay, where we have this 1 + 1 + 2 design. Let me go back down to my slides to show this more in detail. And so we can think of this as also being, so this is an example of that Clementi. We have 1 + 1 + 2 in terms of measure size, okay? 8 measure sentences are a doubling of that, so it's 2 + 2 + 4. The first 2 statements of a musical sentence are often subphrases. They don't have cadences. Therefore, the sentence is not a periodic structure. So a sentence can be within a periodic structure, but it's not unto itself a period. The first 2 statements rely upon the conclusion for closure and are therefore linked. And so let's look at this example. So that went by pretty fast. Let me play it again. 2 measure, 2. So this is a 2 + 2 + 4 sentence structure. Also note that it ends with a half cadence. So the half cadence is here. This all relies upon the only real cadence is here. Everything else kind of relies upon that half cadence to finish the thought. We can extend that outward. So let's look at this example. One thing I would ask if we were looking at this in person is should this end? If you listen to this, you can ask yourself, where should this naturally cadence? We have a 2 + 2 + 4-ish musical sentence, but it's been extended by 2 more bars. So listen to where you think it should be finish, and then think about how Mozart extended it. So to me, it should end at measure 8 because that would satisfy the 2 + 2 + 4 design. However, there is this extension here that concludes with the tonic at the end. So I could probably bypass some of these extra slides and we can look at them in class. However, there are more examples of basically a short, long sentence structure within
16.1
within a larger musical song. a cadence. That is a cadence. And so in class, we'll probably talk about what a cadence actually is and what it isn't. In this case, this is just a sort of a contrapuntal moment where we have inverted dominance. A cadence is usually a full dominant to tonic motion. So we'll look at this more in class and talk about how to build and hear and identify different types of cadences. Please look this over and be prepared to talk about how a perfect authentic cadence is different from an imperfect one. And these top three are going to be our primary focus: perfect, imperfect, and half. We will also talk about a Phrygian half cadence where as it is a separate kind of cadence where there's a type of half cadence where in C minor, usually it's in a minor key, where we are looking at a half step from lay to sol in the bass. Phrygian half cadence. I think Phrygian half cadences sound super awesome, mostly because of this sol motion in the bass. Imperfect authentic cadences do not typically have that sol do dialogue in the bass, but instead they have a T do motion in the bass, or something that dilutes the power of the dominant tonic relationship. And again, we'll talk about more of that in class this week. So that's a good introduction to phrases, motives, and periods, and we'll see you guys in the class sessions.